Hey everyone, Kestrel here. Thanks for tuning into this video. I have some cosmic horror stories for you today, sure to make you fear what looks at you from your inner mind. If you enjoy this video, leave me a like and let me know what else you want to see in the future. Hit the subscribe button to stay up to date. Now let's begin. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia from a young age. Doctor thinks it developed because of my mom's constant mental abuse and my dad's physical. I wasn't allowed to have friends, so I made my own. They were always with me, whispering comfort when I was alone, screaming warnings when Dad's footsteps thudded down the hall. They never left me, even when I grew up and moved into the cramped studio apartment. It's funny how solitude can make the voices louder, a blank canvas for them to paint on. I'd spent hours staring at the empty space in front of me, my hands stained with charcoal and oil paint, my head filled with murmurs that twisted and overlapped until I couldn't tell one from the next. The art was supposed to help, you know. The doctor said it would give the voices a way out, something tangible to ground me when my mind began to spiral, and it worked, for a time. The swirling faces on the canvases, the distorted silhouettes, the hollow eyes, they were mine, a reflection of the mess inside. But then the dreams started. It was the same each night. I'd wake up gasping, the smell of salt water thick in my nose, my skin prickling like something had been crawling over me. My hands trembled, and I'd hear it, low, reverberating, like a groan from the ocean floor. A voice, but deeper, like it was pulling my thoughts apart thread by thread. My usual voices, the familiar ones, would react, hissing in panic, warning me to block it out. They'd never done that before. Usually they were content to bicker and babble among themselves, leaving me to pick through the noise. But now they were different, afraid. One night, after the dream had drenched me in a cold sweat, I found it. A small, twisted idol, wedged between my art supplies. Salt crusted along the ridges, and the face carved into the stone was something I couldn't quite comprehend. A writhing mass of tentacles, eyes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I didn't know where it came from. Maybe I bought it in one of my fugues, wandering the waterfront in the dead of night, pulled by the smell of brine and decay. I couldn't remember, and that made me sick to my stomach. When I touched it, the voices fell silent, all of them. I've never known such quiet, just the deep, rolling sound, like waves crashing against some unseen shore, punctuated by that groaning, resonant voice. I stayed up until dawn, scratching the pattern from the idol onto canvas, over and over, layering charcoal until my hands were blackened and raw. The idol seemed to pulse, as if pleased. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just painted. When the sun finally broke through the grime-streaked window, I looked at the wall of canvases and saw it. A pattern, a sprawling spiral, like the tentacles of some enormous creature curling inward. It wasn't just random strokes and lines. It was deliberate, planned. And that's when I knew. The voice wasn't mine. It never had been. The days blurred together after that. I would wake, stiff and aching, sprawled on the paint-streaked floor, my hands cracked and bleeding from hours of work. The canvases covered every wall now, creeping across the ceiling like a spreading infection. I'd catch glimpses of them moving in my peripheral vision. The lines seemed to pulse and shift when I wasn't directly looking at them. The idol remained on the shelf above my workbench, its eyes, if they could be called that, always pointed at me, watching, judging. I began to hear the sound of rushing water, even when the taps were dry, a deep, echoing roar that rose and fell with the sway of my own breath. Once, I woke to find the floor of my studio wet, the boards slick and swollen as if the ocean had crept in during the night. I stumbled to my feet, slipping on the damp wood. the briny air stinging my nose. The windows were shut, the door was locked, yet the salt lingered, soaking into the walls, seeping into my lungs. The paintings seemed darker now, their shapes more defined, their eyes more numerous. I found myself speaking to them, whispering half-mad apologies as I layered paint over their twisted forms, trying to drown them beneath fresh coats of white gesso. But the colors bled through, the spirals reforming as I scrubbed the canvases with raw, trembling hands. And still, the idol watched.
Come,
the voice whispered, closer now, each word a low, thrumming vibration that rattled my teeth.
come and see.
I reached for the idol, my fingers trembling, my breath hitching in my throat. I held it in my hands, the cold stone pressing into my palms, the salt cutting into my skin like tiny, jagged teeth. The voices returned, screaming in my mind, 1,000 shrill warnings overlapping until they became a single, suffocating roar. No, I whispered back, my voice hoarse, my throat raw. No, I won't. But the idol pulsed, once, a slow, deliberate heartbeat that echoed through my bones.
Come,
It repeated, the words seeping into my thoughts, threading through my every fear, my every doubt.
come and see.
And I knew, in that moment, that I would. The phone rang this morning, jarring me from a dreamless haze. My body sprawled across the paint-streaked floor. I fumbled for it, my hands stiff and trembling, charcoal still clinging to my cracked fingertips. Hello? My voice came out raw from days of muttering to myself and whispering to the shifting shadows on my walls. You picked up this time. Good. Came the steady, clinical tone of Dr. Mercer. I was beginning to worry. You've missed our last 3 sessions. I hesitated, my gaze flicking to the idol, its unblinking eyes locked on me, its silent command pressing against my thoughts. I've been busy, I croaked, my throat tight. Art, you know how it gets. I'd like to meet you in person, Dr. Mercer continued, his tone firm, his concern poorly hidden beneath the practical neutrality of a seasoned psychiatrist. It's been a while since our last assessment, and I'd like to see how you're progressing. I bit down on my tongue, my teeth grinding against each other, a faint copper taste pulling at the back of my mouth. The idol pulsed again, a slow, deliberate throb that echoed in my skull. I don't think that's a good idea, I whispered, my eyes fixed on the twisted, salt-encrusted figure. Things have changed. That's precisely why we need to talk, Dr. Mercer replied, his voice unwavering. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., at my office. I'll expect to see you. The line clicked dead before I could protest. I left the idol behind when I went to see Dr. Mercer. The office was cold, sterile, the walls too white, the light too bright. Dr. Mercer watched me carefully, his eyes sharp behind thin wire-rimmed glasses. He leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression that same unreadable mask he always wore. You know, Dr. Mercer said, his voice distant, as if coming from a great depth. You're not the first patient of mine to hear them. You should follow them. Do what they say. I blinked, my heart stumbling over itself. I looked up, meeting his eyes, but his lips hadn't moved. What? My throat suddenly dry. I said you look tired, Dr. Mercer replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. Are you getting enough rest? I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Had I imagined it? The air felt heavier. The shadows in the corners of the sterile office seemed to be stretching, as if listening. I need to go, I stammered, pushing myself up from the chair, my hands trembling. Dr. Mercer watched me leave, his expression unreadable, the door clicking shut behind me. When I returned to my apartment, I felt it immediately. A suffocating weight in the air, thicker than before, the briny stench almost unbearable. The walls were covered in more paintings, dozens more. Some of them I recognized, the spirals, the eyes, the writhing forms, but others were different, bolder, angrier, darker. I don't remember painting them. The idol still sat where I had left it, its unblinking eyes staring at me, the salt crust thicker, the ridges sharper. The phone rang, cutting through the thick, briny air. "Hello?" I croaked, my throat dry and cracked. "Ah, you picked up this time. Good," came the steady, clinical tone of Dr. Mercer. "I was beginning to worry. You missed our last 3 sessions." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Had I really just heard this? Again? I was just there, I stammered, my mind scrambling to piece together the fractured fragments of memory. "I just saw you." A long silence crackled on the line, like static rolling in on a distant tide. "No," Dr. Mercer replied, his tone steady, each word deliberate, like stones dropping into deep water. "You weren't. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. at my office. I'll expect to see you." The line clicked dead, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like the maddening hum of the deep. I stared at the phone in my hand, the cord coiled like a twisted tentacle, my pulse thundering in my ears. I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping over the walls of my studio. More paintings had appeared, dozens more. The spirals tighter, the eyes more numerous, the salt thicker. The idol sat still where I had left it, its unblinking eyes fixed on me, the crust of salt spreading across the shelf like creeping coral. That night I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lights. Every shadow felt like it held its own breath, waiting for me to slip into darkness. The paintings leaned in closer, their eyes multiplying, the spirals tightening with every glance I stole at them. I could feel them pressing against the edges of my vision, like an audience inching forward in their seats, eager for the next act. I collapsed into the worn armchair in the corner, the springs groaning beneath my weight. My hands were trembling, my fingertips still stained black from hours of frantic sketching. Charcoal dust ground into my skin like ash. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing, trying to focus on the air moving in and out of my lungs. But behind my eyelids, the spirals waited. They coiled tighter, drawing me inward, pulling my thoughts into their center. I felt my hands moving, sketching in the air, my fingers tracing those same cursed shapes I had scrawled onto every wall, every canvas. I forced them to still, clenching my fists until my nails bit into my palms, grounding myself in the sharp, clean pain. A creak snapped my eyes open, the soft groan of old wood shifting under weight. I whipped my head toward the far side of the room, my pulse spiking, but everything was still. The idol sat on its shelf, just as I had left it, its twisted form casting long, jagged shadows that stretched across the wall. But something felt wrong. The darkness beneath the canvases seemed deeper, the shadows sharper, like the edges of broken glass. I swore one of the eyes in the nearest painting had just blinked, the painted lid flicking shut and open in the space of a heartbeat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the madness back, to force my mind into some semblance of order. I needed sleep, real sleep, not the fevered, haunted half-dreams that had clung to me for days like wet fabric. When I opened my eyes again, the painting had moved, just a fraction, closer. Its spirals had tightened, the lines twisting and overlapping, drawing my gaze toward their center. I took a stumbling step back, my heel catching on the edge of my workbench. My hand shot out, gripping the edge, my fingers brushing against splintered wood and half-crushed charcoal sticks. I tried to steady myself, to focus on something real, something solid, but the room felt wrong. The angles were too sharp, and the shadows too deep. The paintings, they were closer now. I hadn't moved them, hadn't touched them, but they leaned in from every wall, their spirals tightening, their eyes multiplying. I felt them watching me, their gaze heavy and accusing. Their twisted forms seemed to shudder in anticipation. I took another step back, then another, my heels striking the corner of the armchair, nearly sending me sprawling. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. My vision blurred at the edges as the walls closed in. The spirals pulled at my thoughts, drawing me into their center, their endless, twisting depths. The room was shrinking, the canvases closing in, the walls bending, warping, collapsing toward me. The painted eyes tracked my every move, their lids flicking shut and open in perfect, synchronized blinks. I choked on a scream, the sound clawing its way up from my throat, my hands flying to my head, my fingers digging into my scalp as if I could tear the madness free. My knees buckled, the floor lurching beneath me, and I collapsed into the chair, my chest heaving, my vision swimming with dark, twisting shapes. And then, silence. I opened my eyes, my heart still hammering, my breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. But the room was normal. The canvases were gone. The walls were bare. The workbench clear. The air crisp and still. The light from the street outside cast clean, undisturbed lines across the floor, and the steady buzzing of the refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, my head throbbing, my hands trembling as I wiped the sweat from my brow. I glanced around, my pulse gradually settling, my mind clawing its way back from the brink. No paintings, no spirals, no eyes. Just my empty, cluttered apartment, exactly as I had left it before the madness had crept in. I let out a long, shuddering breath, my shoulders slumping, the tension bleeding from my limbs. Maybe it had just been a nightmare, a waking dream, a hallucination brought on by days without sleep. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the lingering fog from my mind. It was over. I just needed rest. A full night's sleep. Maybe I'd call Dr. Mercer in the morning, tell him what had happened, maybe ask for stronger meds. And then the phone rang. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The shrill metallic trill cut through the stillness, each ring stabbing into my mind like jagged blades. Slowly I reached for the phone, my hand trembling, my breath catching in my throat as I pressed it to my ear. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Ah, you picked up this time. Good," came the steady, clinical tone of Dr. Mercer. "I was beginning to worry. You've missed our last 3 sessions." I dropped the phone, the receiver clattering against the floor, the cord swaying like a severed tendril. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the steady hum of the city beyond the windows. My vision swam, the edges of the room warping, bending, the shadows growing teeth and creeping closer. "No," I whispered, my hands trembling as I staggered to my feet. "No, this isn't happening. I woke up. But the room felt wrong, too solid, too sharp. The air pressed in around me, thick and heavy, like every breath sucking in a cold, damp cloth. My eyes darted to the walls, my heart lurching as I realized the canvases had returned. They lined every inch of the apartment, their spirals twisting inward, their eyes tracking my every move. I stumbled back, my heel striking the leg of my workbench, the wood creaking beneath my weight. My gaze shot to the shelf above where the idol sat. Its twisted, salt-encrusted form seemed to be leaning toward me, its many eyes unblinking, unyielding. It beckoned. I took a shaky step closer, my fingers twitching at my sides, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My mind screamed at me to turn away, to run, to throw the thing into the deepest part of the ocean and never look back. But my feet kept moving, dragging me toward it like a moth to an open flame. The idol's ridges seemed sharper now, its edges more defined, the salt crust crackling as if it were alive, growing with each step I took. My pulse pounded in my ears, a frantic, unrelenting drumbeat, my thoughts unraveling, my sanity fraying with every inch I closed. The voice whispered, the sound threading through my mind, weaving itself into every fear, every doubt, every forgotten memory.
Come and see.
I reached the shelf, my trembling hands hovering just inches from the idol, the salt flaking beneath my breath, the twisted form pulsing like a living thing.
Come closer.
It whispered, its tone a low, reverberating groan, like the creak of a rusted ship hull straining against the weight of the deep.
Hear me.
My fingers curled around the idol, the salt-crusted surface biting into my skin, the ridges sharp and jagged like broken bone. I felt a cold shock race up my arm, spreading through my veins, seizing my heart in an icy grip. My breath hitched, my throat tightened as if the air itself had turned into seawater, thick and choking.
Come.
The voice whispered, deeper now, its tone vibrating through my bones, pulsing in my marrow.
Come and be free.
I tried to pull my hand back, to break the connection, but my body refused to listen. My fingers tightened around the idol, my knuckles whitening, the salt cutting into my flesh, blood welling up around my grip, trickling down my wrists in slow, glistening trails. No, I croaked, my voice a raw, desperate whisper. Let go. Let go. But my arm moved of its own accord, my feet shuffling forward, dragging me toward the center of the room. My head snapped up, my neck twisted with a harsh, mechanical jerk, my gaze locking onto the nearest painting, the spirals twisted inward, pulling at my thoughts, my memories, unraveling my mind like a loose thread. I felt myself slipping, my consciousness shunted to the back of my own mind, my thoughts scattering like dry leaves in a storm. I clawed at the edges of my awareness, trying to regain control, but my body ignored me, my legs carrying me forward in jerky, unnatural strides. No, 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 I whispered, my voice echoing in the hollow, empty chamber of my mind. I felt the other voices, the ones that had been my only companions for so long, screaming around me, their panicked whispers overlapping, crashing into each other, blending into a single desperate wail. They were being pushed back too, their cries fading, their words drowned out by the slow, deliberate pulse of the thing now riding my mind, steering my body like a marionette. I felt my lips curl into a grin, my teeth bared a feral, predatory smile, the muscles in my face pulling taut, my jaw aching with the strain. My hands twitched, my fingers flexing, the blood dripping from my wrist to the floor, each drop a sharp, wet splatter that echoed through my mind like the beat of a war drum. The thing inside me turned my head, tilting it to the side, my neck crackling with the motion, my gaze locking onto the idol still clutched in my hand. It pulsed, its surface wet and glistening, the salt crackling, the eyes within it blinking in slow, deliberate unison. I tried to scream, to force my body to drop the idol, to break free, but my lips only stretched wider, my eyes narrowing, my breath coming in slow, even rasps, the thing within me reveling in its newfound freedom. I felt my legs moving, my feet dragging me toward the door, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The spirals in the painting seemed to twist in time with my steps, their eyes tracking my every move, my vision blurred, the edges of my world flickering like a damaged film reel, the colors bleeding together, the shadows stretching, reaching, twisting. I could still feel the cold, sharp bite of the salt in my hand, the slow trickle of blood down my wrist, but I had no control, my body nothing more than a hollow shell, my mind a prisoner locked behind a wall of spiraling thoughts and whispered commands. The voices around me cried out, their words blending into a single desperate plea, their whispers filling my head, their screams echoing through the dark, hollow spaces of my mind. But the thing inside me only laughed, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through my chest, my lungs filling with the thick, briny air of the deep. It whispered, my lips moving without my consent, my voice a harsh, guttural rasp, and the words scraping against my throat like broken glass.
Come and be free.
Days bled together, time slipping through my grasp like water through clenched fists. I felt each hour pass, each minute stretch thin, my mind fraying at the edges, my sanity unraveling thread by thread. The thing inside me wasted no time. It moved with a purpose, my legs carrying me through the city's darkened streets, my hands reaching out, grasping, pulling, bending the world to its will. It started small, a whispered word to a stranger on a subway platform, my lips curling into that same twisted grin as my eyes locked onto theirs. I felt the spark ignite in their mind, the darkness seeping in, their thoughts unraveling, their reality fracturing. I watched as their expression shifted, their pupils dilating, their breath catching, their gaze turning glassy and distant. A flicker of recognition, the thing inside me nodding, satisfied, my head tilting at an unnatural angle, my neck cracking with the motion. Then it moved on, my feet carrying me down cracked sidewalks, through shadowed alleyways, into smoke-filled basements and flickering neon-lit bars, my mouth whispering to anyone that would listen, my fingers curling around their arms, their shoulders, their necks, the whispers slipping from my lips like the low rolling crash of distant waves. They followed. One by one, they fell in line, their eyes glassy, their movements jerky, their breath coming in slow, shallow rasps as the darkness took root in their minds, twisting their thoughts, warping their reality, bending their will to match my own. I watched, helpless, as the thing inside me gathered them, herded them, led them into the abandoned warehouses and crumbling churches that dotted the edges of the city, their walls echoing with the whispers of the lost, the forgotten, the damned. It made them tear down the old rotting boards that blocked the doors and windows, rip up the crumbling tiles and shattered glass, clear the space of dust and debris, the air thick with their grunts, their wheezing breaths, their glassy, empty stares. I felt my lips curl into a satisfied smile, my hands flexing, my fingers twitching with anticipation, the thing inside me reveling in its growing power, its influence spreading like a stain, a dark, creeping infection that consumed everything it touched. The rituals began. They painted the floors in thick, looping spirals, their hands shaking, their breath coming in short, sharp gasps, their eyes flicking from side to side, their whispers overlapping, blending into a single desperate chant. They carved symbols into the crumbling walls, their nails breaking, their fingertips bleeding, their minds unraveling with every stroke, every cut, every twisted, looping line. I screamed, I raged, I clawed at the darkness that surrounded me, my thoughts straining against the thing's control, my mind a prisoner locked into the back of my own skull, my every plea, my desperate cries swallowed by the echoes of 1,000 whispered voices. It ignored me, my body moving on autopilot, my legs carrying me from one corner of the city to the next, my hands grasping, my mouth whispering, my eyes locking onto those I passed, their faces twisting, their eyes widening, their thoughts splintering as the thing inside me spread its influence, its will, its darkness. The followers grew in number, their ranks swelling. their whispers echoing through the darkened halls of the forgotten buildings they had claimed, their eyes glassy, their movements mechanical, their breaths shallow and strained. The thing inside me was building something. I could feel it in the pit of my mind, a slow, deliberate pulse, a vibration that echoed through my bones, my veins, my soul. It had a plan, a purpose, a goal, and I was powerless to stop it. My every thought, every scream, every desperate plea lost in the cacophony of its whispers. The days stretched into weeks, the air growing thicker, the shadows deeper, the spirals tightening, their edges cutting into the corners of my mind, the darkness spreading, growing, consuming everything in its path. And still, my body moved, my feet carrying me through the twisting labyrinthian streets, my hands reaching, my lips whispering, my mind unraveling, and the thing inside me only grew stronger. It gathered the cult, its followers moving in slow, shuffling steps, their glassy eyes fixed on the spirals they had painted onto the walls and floors, their fingers twitching, their breath coming in short, shallow gasps. They had abandoned their old lives, their old selves, their minds hollowed out, their thoughts twisted, bent, shattered. I felt my body moving among them, my feet dragging me across the cracked, crumbling tiles, my hands reaching out to steady the quaking forms around me, my lips whispering encouragement, my teeth bared in that same twisted, unnatural grin. They gathered supplies, their fingers gripping rusted metal, broken glass, jagged stone, their breaths coming in sharp, desperate hisses as they carved the final spirals into the walls, the floors, the ceilings. They painted the symbols in their own blood, their hands shaking, their veins standing out beneath the pale, sweat-slicked skin, their eyes rolling back into their heads as the whispers took hold. The air grew thick, the shadows stretching, bending, twisting into forms that defied reason, their edges sharp, their shapes writhing, their eyes blinking, their teeth snapping. The thing inside me took its place at the center of the room, my bare feet sinking into the wet, sticky spirals that covered the floor, the thick, coppery stench of blood filling my nostrils, the air vibrating with the echoes of 1,000 whispered voices. The cultists circled me, their heads bowed, their hands trembling, their breath coming in slow, ragged gasps, their eyes glassy, empty, their whispers blending into the single, rising chant. The sound building, swelling, crashing into the walls, the ceiling, the floor, the air itself vibrating. I felt my hands rise, my fingers splayed, my head tilting back, my eyes rolling up, my mouth stretching wide, my jaw aching as the thing inside me let out a slow, rumbling laugh, the sound vibrating through my chest, my ribs aching with the force of it. No, 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 I whispered, my thoughts straining against the thing's control, my mind clawing at the darkness. Every plea, every scream, swallowed by the rising tide of whispers that filled the room. A figure stepped forward, one of the cultists, his eyes wide, his mouth twisted into a grotesque, lopsided grin, his fingers curled around the hilt of a curved, rusted dagger, the blade slick with blood, the metal glinting in the dim, flickering light. I felt my head tilt, my neck cracking, my eyes locking onto his, my mouth stretching into that same twisted, predatory grin, my pulse thundering in my ears. The cultist stepped closer, his footsteps slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving mine, his hands shaking, his fingers flexing around the hilt of the dagger. He reached me, his chest heaving, his breath rattling in his throat, his eyes rolling back into his head as the whispers took hold. He raised the dagger, the blade catching the flickering light, the edge jagged, rusted, sharp. I felt my head tilt back, my throat exposed, my skin tight, my pulse pounding just beneath the surface, my breath catching in my throat, my mind screaming, my thoughts clawing at the darkness. The blade bit into my flesh, the metal cold, sharp, and wet. I felt the skin split, the blood welling up, trickling down my neck, my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as my vision began blurring, my thoughts scattering. The whispers swelled, the spirals tightened, the darkness closing in, the edges of my vision darkening. The air was thickening, the floor was tilting, and the shadows were closing in. The room was spinning. I felt my knees buckle, my body collapsing, my head striking the wet, blood-slicked floor, my thoughts slipping, my breath hitching, my vision darkening. The shadows were swallowing me. My pulse slowed, my thoughts scattered, and my vision faded. And then, silence. For a moment, there was nothing. No whispers, no spirals, no darkness. Just the cold, empty void of oblivion. The stillness of the abyss. The silence. A phrase echoed in my mind. Finglui Maglanafa Cthulhu Rie Waglanagal Fatagen. And then the phone rang. I felt my body jolt, my mind snapping back into place, my breath hitching, my pulse spiking, my vision flickering, my thoughts spiraling. The phone rang again. The sharp metallic trill cut through the darkness. I reached for it, my hands trembling, my fingers curling around the cold, hard plastic, the receiver crackling against my ear. My heart was hammering in my chest. Hello? You picked up this time, good, came the steady, clinical tone of Dr. Mercer. I was beginning to worry. You missed our last 3 sessions. I had heard the whispers for years, the quiet murmurs of a mansion that defied the flow of time itself. They called it the House at the Edge of Time, an ancient, sprawling estate hidden deep in the Scottish Highlands, surrounded in mist and myth. I never put much stock into ghost stories or superstitions, but as an archaeologist, I've always been drawn to the places that history forgot, the cracks in our understanding of time and space. I first heard of it from an old sailor in a seaside pub, his eyes clouded with cataracts, his breath thick with the stench of brine and whiskey. He told me of a house that only appeared when the storm clouds gathered and the wind howled like a wounded animal. A house that stood outside the reach of any clock, where the air itself tasted of rusted iron and forgotten breaths. I chalked it up to drunk ramblings at the time, but the years passed, and I kept hearing fragments of the same story, in the margins of old journals, in the half-mad letters of explorers who vanished without a trace, in the cryptic warnings of highland villagers who refused to speak its name. They all spoke of it with the same hushed fear, like children whispering of monsters beneath their beds. Eventually, my curiosity outgrew my caution. I packed my gear, chartered a small plane, and made my way to the Highlands, determined to find the truth about the myth. If the mansion truly existed, it would be the discovery of a lifetime. A place where the boundary between past, present, and future had grown thin enough to tear. When I arrived, the weather was perfect, too perfect. The sun clung to the sky like an old promise, its light too bright, casting hard, unnatural shadows across the hills. It felt wrong, as if time itself were holding its breath. I hiked through the dense fog and bristling pines, my boots sinking into the wet, spongy earth, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying voices that spoke my name in a dozen forgotten tongues. I ignored them. The rational part of my mind clung to the logic of the modern world, but something deeper, something primal, stirred in the base of my skull, urging me to turn back. I reached the edge of a crumbling stone path, overgrown with wild thorns and slick with the residue of recent rain. And there it was, the mansion, rising from the mist like a blackened tooth, its spires clawing at the sky, its windows like lidless eyes. As I stepped onto the path, I felt it, a shudder in the air, like the slow seismic groan of ancient stone shifting beneath the earth. My watch stuttered, the second hand twitching like a trapped insect before falling still. I took another step, and the world seemed to breathe in around me. The air thickened, and I felt a pressure on my chest, as though the mansion itself were exhaling in slow, measured breaths. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, as if the very fabric of reality had grown thin, stretched taut over something vast and unknowable. I crossed the threshold. The doors, ancient and swollen with rot, creaked open of their own accord, revealing a grand hallway lined with warped, time-worn portraits. They stared down at me with hollow eyes, their features blurred and twisted, as though painted by hands that had forgotten the passage of time itself. The air inside was cold, colder than the mist outside, and it carried a scent I couldn't place, a mixture of damp stone, old paper, and the faint metallic tang of blood. As I stepped inside, the doors groaned shut behind me, sealing me in the belly of the house. I felt the hair on my arms rise, my breath fogging in the cold air. And then I heard it, the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps on the stairs above, echoing through the empty hall like a whisper from the abyss. I froze, my heart beating hard in my chest, my eyes looking up the stairs, fearing for what was to come. I waited for what felt like hours before I forced my heart to stop racing as I took a deep breath. Maybe it was just the house settling, I thought to myself. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and mildew, tinged with something sharper, more metallic, like old blood or rusted iron. I paused, listening, my breath catching in my throat as a faint, whispering sound drifted down from the upper floors. It was too quiet to be the wind, too rhythmic to be the creaking of settling wood. It almost sounded like breathing. I turned slowly, my boots creaking against the warped floorboards, the shadows around me stretching and shifting as if stirred by my movement. For a moment, I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement, a tall, indistinct shape standing just beyond the edge of my vision, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though watching me with silent, predatory interest. I spun around, my pulse thundering in my ears, but the hall was empty, the air still, the shadows pulling around the baseboards like spilled ink. I exhaled, the breath escaping my lungs in a thin, ragged whisper, and forced myself to move forward, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet that ran the length of the hall. I passed beneath a massive, dust-choked chandelier, its crystal shards trembling faintly as if disturbed by a distant, subterranean tremor. The feeling of being watched clung to me, a prickling sensation that crept up the back of my neck, tightening my scalp, sending my nerves alight with primal fear. I turned again, half expecting to see a figure standing at the top of the stairs, its hollow eyes locked on mine. But the hall remained empty, the shadows frozen, the silence unbroken. And then I heard it again, the breathing, faint but unmistakable, echoing from the upper floors, the slow, shuddering rasp of lungs drawing in air, each breath ragged and uneven, like the last, desperate gasps of a drowning man. It came and went, a whisper of life in the house that should have been long dead, and I felt the fine hairs of my arms stand on end, my heart quickening, my mouth dry as a bone. I forced myself up the grand staircase, my hand trailing along the cracked, splintering banister, my skin tingling as if the wood itself were alive, its ancient fibers straining beneath my touch. I glanced down, half expecting to see some fresh gouges in the wood, the marks of frantic clawed fingers, but the banister remained whole, its surface polished to a dull, uneven sheen by decades of unseen hands. As I reached the landing, I paused, my breath catching in my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt it again, that sharp burning awareness of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking my every move, of the air around me growing heavier, colder, as if something vast and ancient had turned its attention to me, its presence pressing down on my soul like the weight of 1,000 forgotten years. I turned slowly and caught a flickering of motion in the tarnished mirror hanging on the far wall. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw my own reflection standing there, a shadowed figure with wide, hollow eyes, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its lips moving in a silent, breathless whisper. I blinked, and the feature was gone, the mirror reflecting only the empty hall behind me, the dust motes swirling in the stagnant air. I willed myself onward, each step feeling heavier than the last, my boots sinking into the threadbare carpet like I was wading through wet sand. The air grew colder as I passed deeper into the mansion, my breath puffing out in thin, ragged clouds that hung in the air like the fading echoes of forgotten screams. I passed a series of doors, their warped, swollen frames twisted into unnatural shapes, as though the very walls of the mansion were buckling under the weight of time. Some of the doors were cracked open, revealing glimpses of rooms beyond, each one a frozen snapshot of a different era, a Victorian sitting room, its velvet curtains heavy with dust and decay, a Renaissance study, its shelves lined with crumbling scrolls and leather-bound tomes, a 1960s kitchen, its linoleum floors cracked and yellowed, a rotary phone dangling from the wall, its cord swinging slowly back and forth as if recently disturbed. I hesitated before one of the doors, my hand hovering over the freezing, tarnished knob. I could hear faint voices drifting from within, their words too quiet to make out, their tones frantic and fearful. I twisted the knob slowly, the metal biting into my palm, and pushed the door open with a low, creaking groan. The room beyond was small and cluttered. The air had the scent of old paper and dry rot. Dust motes swirled in the pale, slanted light that filtered through the cracked, warped windows, their edges rimed with frost despite the oppressive heat I had felt outside. A small writing desk stood against the far wall, its surface littered with loose papers, old maps, and weathered notebooks. The leather chair behind it had collapsed in on itself, its stuffing spilling out like the innards of a long-dead animal. I stepped inside, my boots stirring the dense layer of dust on the floor. I reached for one of the notebooks, its cracked leather cover rough against my fingertips, and flipped it open, the brittle pages crackling in protest. The writing was dense, cramped, the ink faded and blotchy, the letters sprawling across the pages in desperate, frantic strokes. It was a journal, the entries dated decades apart, yet written in the same hand, the words spiraling into madness as the writer documented his slow, inevitable descent into temporal dislocation. January 17, 1872. The house has begun to whisper to me. It knows my name, my thoughts, my fears. It shows me glimpses of futures yet to come, of deaths yet to be suffered, of shadows that move in the corners of my vision. I fear I am losing myself, that I'm becoming part of this place, a ghost in my own life. May 4th, 1913. I saw myself today, standing at the end of the hall, my eyes hollow, my skin stretched thin over brittle bones. I watched myself watch me, and I felt the unblinking gaze of my own shadow pass over me like a shroud. I cannot leave. I do not remember why I ever thought I could. September 29th, 1956. Time is a spiral, a looping, twisting, unending thing, and I am caught in its coils. My life stretched thin, my memories bleeding into themselves like the ink on these pages. I have forgotten my name. I have forgotten my face. I am the house, and the house is me. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the reality of my situation sank in, the words on the brittle pages burning themselves into my mind. I glanced up and almost screamed. In the cracked, dust-covered glass of the window, I saw my reflection, my own face staring back at me, my eyes wide and hollow, my mouth twisted into a silent, breathless scream. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw another figure standing behind me, a tall, faceless shape, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward my shoulder. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the room was empty, the air still, the shadows frozen. I staggered back into the hall, the journal clutched in my trembling hands, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts, the words on the pages whispering through my mind like the echoes of long-dead voices. The house was watching me. I could feel it, its attention pressing down on my soul like the weight of 1,000 forgotten years, its unseen eyes tracking my every move, its whispered secrets slipping into the cracks of my mind, erasing me, unmaking me, piece by piece. I stumbled back down the hall, my thoughts unraveling like the fraying threads of an ancient tapestry. I felt the house shifting around me, its walls creaking and groaning, the air thickening, the shadows lengthening, the whispers growing louder, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of despair and madness. I reached the top of the grand staircase, my hand gripping the cracked, splintered banister, and glanced back down into the dark, yawning mouth of the entrance hall. And then I saw it, the tall, indistinct shape standing just inside the door, its head tilted at the same unnatural angle, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward the threshold as if to catch hold of something or someone. I felt my heart stutter, my blood turning to ice in my veins, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing, and in that moment, I realized the horrible truth. It was me. I had watched myself walk through that door, had felt my own eyes on my back, had heard my own breath whispering through the air as I crossed the threshold into this nightmare. I stepped back, my boots slipping on the cracked, warped floorboards, my mind fracturing beneath the weight of the impossible, the house creaking around me, its walls whispering my name in a dozen forgotten tongues. The air around me seemed to tighten. The shadows along the walls coiled like the tendrils of some vast, unseen creature, their edges flickering and twitching in the pale, slanted light filtering through the cracked windows. I felt a prickling sensation creep up my spine, the fine hairs of my arms standing on end, my skin tingling with the icy electric awareness of being watched. A low rumbling sound drifted through the mansion, too deep and guttural to be the groan of old beams settling, too rhythmic to be the creak of wind through warped floorboards. It pulsed through the walls, vibrating in my bones, a slow predatory thrum that resonated with the very air around me. I turned slowly and strained my ears, my senses sharpening. The sound was closer now, moving through the walls, the floors, the very fabric of the house itself, a slow, methodical scraping like the drag of claws against stone, the rustle of ancient leathery wings unfolding in the darkness. I took a step back, my boots scraping against the splintered floorboards, my mind racing, my heart thundering in my chest. I glanced down the hall, the shadows flickering at the edges of my vision, the air growing heavier as if something vast and ancient had drawn a deep, shuddering breath. And then I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, slipping through the cracks in the walls, the words twisted and distorted, as though spoken from a mouth that had forgotten the shape of a language. Run. I retreated as the whispers grew louder, overlapping, their voices blending into a rising, discordant chorus. Their words scraping against my mind like rusted metal, tearing at the edges of my sanity. I spun around and caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the hall, a tall, twisted shape, its limbs too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles, its head tilting back and forth like a predator scenting the air. Its eyes, hollow and lidless, their depths flickering with the pale, ghostly light of a dozen forgotten souls, locked onto mine, their gaze piercing, unblinking, filled with a hunger so vast, so ancient, it seemed to pull the very breath from my lungs. I felt my blood run cold, my muscles locking up, my mind fracturing beneath the weight of its attention, my vision narrowing, the edges of my world going dark as the creature took a slow, deliberate step forward, its claws scraping against the warped, splintered floorboards, its breath rattling in its hollow chest like the last dying gasps of 1,000 forgotten lives. I stammered back, my boots slipping on the cracked, uneven boards, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The creature's shadow stretching and contorting along the walls, its twisted limbs scraping against the ancient wood, its head tilting at an unnatural angle, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. I turned my head, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, to escape. The shadows closed in around me, their edges flickering and twitching into the shapes of the souls trapped within the mansion. Their mouths open in silent, breathless screams, their eyes hollow, unseeing, filled with a bottomless, unending hunger. I fumbled down the hall, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts, the whispers growing louder, their voices echoing in my mind, their words overlapping, blending, their meaning lost in the chaos, the madness, the horror. And then I heard it. The slow, deliberate scrape of claws against the wood, the rustle of leathery wings unfolding in the darkness, the low, predatory growl of a beast that had waited centuries for a fresh soul to claim. I ran, and behind me, the beast followed, its hollow eyes burning with a pale, ghostly light. I stumbled down the corridor as the whispers in the walls grew louder, their voices overlapping, their words scraping against my mind like rusted metal, tearing at the fragile threads of my sanity. I reached a corner and collapsed against the wall, my back pressing into the cold, cracked plaster, my eyes darting down the hallway I had just fled. The darkness pooled there, thick and unnatural, its edges flickering like the dying wings of a trapped moth, its depths roiling with a slow, relentless hunger. And then I saw it, the creature, emerging from the shadows, its limbs too long, its joints bent at an unnatural angle, its hollow, lidless eyes locked onto mine. It moved slowly, deliberately, each step a slow, scraping drag of claws against the warped, splintered floorboards. Its skin, if you could even call it that, clung to its bones like wet parchment, stretched thin and translucent, its veins pulsing with a pale, ghostly light, its fingers long and twisted, their tips scraping against the walls, leaving deep, jagged grooves in the ancient wood. I felt my muscles locking up, dread pouring over me beneath the weight of its attention, the edges of my world going dark as the creature took another slow, deliberate step forward, its head tilting further, its hollow eyes burning with a flickering, desperate light. And then it spoke, its voice low and wet, like the sound of stones grinding together beneath the weight of an ancient, crumbling tomb.
You should not have come here.
It whispered, its words twisted and distorted, as though forced through a throat that had forgotten the shape of language.
You should have left when you had the chance.
I felt a cold, shuddering terror settle into my bones. What are you? I managed to choke out, my voice trembling, my hands shaking, my mind struggling to comprehend the impossible, the horrifying, the truth. The creature paused, its head tilting further, its hollow eyes narrowing, its long, twisted fingers flexing against the walls, its breath rattling in its chest like the slow, measured beat of a colossal, ancient heart.
I am you,
it whispered, its voice dripping with sorrow, with regret, with the weight of 1,000 forgotten years.
I am what you become. I am what the house makes you. I am what you will be forever.
I felt my heart drop, my blood turning to ice in my veins.
Leave,
it rasped.
Leave before the house takes you, before it unravels you, before it turns you into this.
It took another slow, deliberate step forward, its claws scraping against the floorboards.
I tried to leave,
it whispered, its voice breaking, its fingers clenching against the walls, the wood cracking beneath its twisted, inhuman strength.
I tried to run, to escape, to break the cycle, but the house does not let go. It holds you, it breaks you, it makes you part of itself, a ghost in your own skin, a shadow in your own mind.
The creature took another step forward, its head tilting back.
Leave,
it whispered, its voice breaking, its claws scraping against the walls.
Leave before the house takes you, before it erases you, before it turns you into this.
And then it lunged, its claws scraping against the floorboards, its breath rattling in its chest, its mouth opening in a soundless scream, its limbs contorting, its joints bending at unnatural angles, its form flickering and twitching like the broken film reel of a forgotten memory. I quickly scrambled backwards, the fear within me reaching its peak as I began to panic. I knew I had to escape, to get away from this thing. I turned and bolted down the corridor, my boots slamming against the ground, the wood groaning beneath each desperate step. The creature's shadow twisted behind me, its limbs stretching unnaturally, its hollow, unblinking eyes fixed on my retreating form. The mansion's walls seemed to close in, the air thickening. Each breath I managed to draw in, sharp and biting, tinged with the cold metallic tang of rust. I stumbled around the corner, my shoulder clipping a cracked, crumbling support beam, pain flaring in my side as splinters tore at my jacket. A long, narrow hallway ahead stretched into darkness, its uneven floorboards sagging beneath the weight of centuries, the distant echoing creak of the creature's footsteps growing louder behind me. The entrance hall finally came into view, its grand cracked doors framed by rotting columns, the pale light from outside leaking through the warped, swollen wood. I felt a flicker of desperate hope, a frantic, irrational surge of relief as I reached for the iron handle, its surface cold and damp beneath my trembling fingers. I twisted it, the metal biting into my palm, the hinges groaning as the door swung open with a violent shudder. I stepped through without hesitation, the darkness beyond swallowing me whole, my heart racing, my mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. I froze. I hadn't escaped. I hadn't broken the cycle. I hadn't left the mansion behind. I stood in another corridor, its walls lined with cracked, crooked portraits, their painted eyes tracking my every move, their twisted faces frozen in expressions of breathless terror. The air around me grew dense and cold, each shuddering breath I took hanging in the air like smoke before being swallowed by the darkness. The shadows pulled around my feet, their edges flickering, twisting, contorting like the grasping limbs of forgotten souls. I staggered back, my hands clutching at the splintered walls, my fingers digging into the crumbling plaster, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I felt something beneath my hand, rough, weathered, its surface uneven and cracked, its edges sharp against my fingertips. I glanced down and saw the cracked leather cover of a journal, its pages yellowed with age, the ink faded and smeared, the words scrawled across the parchment in desperate, frenzied strokes. I opened it with trembling hands, the brittle pages cracking like dry leaves, the words blurring before my eyes. Each line twisted and uneven, the sentences slanting off the page like the mad ravings of a mind unraveling. I am trapped, the first entry reads, its letters jagged and uneven, the ink bleeding into the brittle paper. The house has taken me. It has made me part of itself, a ghost in my own skin, a shadow in my own mind. I can hear it now, whispering my name, calling me back, drawing me deeper into its twisted, rotting heart. I flipped through the pages, my pulse pounding in my temples, my breath shallow, my fingers trembling as I read each frantic, desperate message, the words scraping against my thoughts like broken glass. "You should not have come," another entry read, the letters sharp and erratic, the ink smeared, the words twisted and distorted, as though written by a hand that had forgotten the shape of language. "You should have left when you had the chance." A cold, suffocating dread settled in my chest beneath the weight of the realization. I had never left. I had never escaped. I had always been here, trapped within the mansion's twisted halls, my memories bleeding into themselves, my screams lost in the darkness. I turned the final page, my heart seizing, my blood freezing in my veins as I read the last, desperate, scribbled message, the letters sharp and jagged, the ink dark and smeared, the words echoing in my mind, their meaning scraping against my sanity like rusted metal. If you are reading this, it is too late. The house has you now. You are part of its story, its endless, twisting loop. You are the next to walk its halls, to hear its whispers, to become its shadow. I felt the air around me grow colder, the darkness pressing in, the walls creaking, the shadows twisting and writhing, and I realized, with a sharp electric jolt of despair, that I had become the thing in the shadows, the twisted, broken figure that had warned me to leave, to run, to escape. And then the journal slipped from my trembling hands, its pages fluttering like the wings of a dying bird, its cover striking the cracked, splintered floorboards with a dull, lifeless thud. And then I heard the front door open in the distance. Thanks again for tuning into this video. Let me know if you like these stories down below. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments. Bye for now.